Welcome, everybody. TMBS Think Tank, your Sunday bonus session. Guys, we're going to try to get to as many of your super chat questions as possible. We have a few questions from Discord that we'll try to get to too. But these are really important for the YouTube channel. Let's set a goal. Let's try to get to about $300 in the super chat. We'll try to get as many of your questions as possible, but mainly when you super chat, you're just helping us keep everything going. And of course, if you can, now is definitely the time to jump in and go to patreon.com/TMBS if you can, obviously. And we help everybody out, give people deals, the whole nine. But it's time for our hangout session. How are you guys doing? David and Matt Leck, David Griscom. How you guys doing?
I'm doing all right. Trying to keep sane.
How's that going?
It's up and down, a lot of pensive walks, but at the same time, it's nice to be able to spend a little time. I don't know. I've been thinking about this as like an opportunity to reset a lot of things in life and just to have a moment that you don't have to be going out and moving constantly. It's actually, if you think about it like that, it can be a little nice. How's your place, Michael?
I as always, I'm always sort of torn about how to point to these things, but I'll just say, I mean, people, in the orbit, people are dying, and you hear stories that are just abominable. Frankly, I think that obviously the blame is never on the first responders, doctors or nurses or anybody like that, but there's going to be another thing that when we fall out of this, not only the big picture things like the decades-long assault on public health care or Andrew Cuomo trying to cut Medicaid, but we're going to have another really serious look at these hospitals and, even things, frankly, in a crisis where it's horrifying and really bad things are going to happen, even with the best efforts. I still really wonder about some of the stories I'm hearing about, not being transparent with families, bodies being moved in ways that are, at the very least, you need to be communicating with people and showing some empathy, even if that is like a necessity. So, yeah,
that stuff's important. And I've also been losing sleep over, the degree to which Bernie promoted the way Joe Rogan said he would vote for him for president. So I'm personally struggling over
losing
that.
Sleep.
What was the social media strategy around Bernie and Joe Rogan saying Bernie was the best Democrat? That's really what's haunting my dreams.
That's the kind of thing when I'm looking at somebody, speaking on FaceTime about having a family member snatched from them and not knowing where their body is. I'm really wondering how you could clip a Joe Rogan video. And probably this is really the time to talk about that right now. I mean, that's actually a good thing to talk about because it's like, this opportunity to reset really is an opportunity universally to just stop bullshit.
Yeah.
Like I can't, whether we're thinking about power and politics and at some point we have to build a competent left. We don't have a left that's fit for power. We don't have a left that's in place right now. And that's a major problem because the center is dead and utterly toxic. And the right is obviously toxic and dangerous and also much more intelligent and effective than the center and has like a plan for the moment. And, in the best of times, I would totally disagree with those takes, obviously, because they are really insular and they are really stupid and they don't lead to anything. But in this moment, it goes from like wrong to horrifying that people could even just be like that could even be occurring in your head, like all of these, same conversations and controversies and freakouts. But, I think they show. I think they show that some people who do some good work are still going to generate some really, 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 really mega stupid and delusional takes. And I think other people, obviously, like in the Democratic mainstream, are just they're just cynicism machines, and that's it. I mean, there's just nothing else to it. And frankly, it shows that a lot of these people are really comfortable. Like, they don't need Donald Trump to lose. They don't need anything to happen. This is mostly just like an aesthetics play for them.
Yeah, I mean, just like when I have gotten on Twitter over the past couple of days, it's really shocking to me to just realize how trivial so many of like the popular conversations that are going on. It's like we engage in those more or less on a certain level just because it seems like those are important. That's how some people are making their decisions, which is ridiculous. But that's the reality. But the fact that we're in this moment, this very frightening moment, as you were saying, people losing their lives, people not, I have people around me who are very frightened right now because they can't get unemployment. They don't have access to income right now, and they essentially have lost their jobs. You're talking to people and realizing the kind of screwed up world that we're living in. It's amazing, actually, to see people trying to relitigate the most nonsensical criticisms of the Bernie movement, and also of a different standard than any other politician in history. Like, what other kind of politicians having to run around and basically like trim and cull their supporters, right? And saying like, well, I like these supporters, I don't like these supporters. No, it's like the point is to win people over, and in our world is to win people over with politics and messaging and ideas that are progressive and move people forward and are beneficial. I don't know. It's such a ridiculous double standard. And I think you're right. It does show how trivial and I hate to use the word privilege, but just like out of touch and just living in a completely different
delusional, privileged, stupid, out of touch, insane, demented, embarrassing, like literally anything.
The idea that I would take seriously a conversation of sort of political manners of a mass movement from people that are paid by Bakari Sellers, for instance, right? Bakari Sellers going off. I didn't know he was recruited straight off of Morehouse campus when he was student council president by AIPAC. Like I'm sick.
He hangs out with there's a picture of him with Sheldon Adelson. Yeah, it isn't even. It's just. Which, and by the way, also like Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Rogan. That literally was the point. That Bernie can win a type of new centrist voter, and Biden can't.
Right.
There you go. And are there any questions or anything in the super chat so far?
Yeah, we do. Okay. We have a few. We did drop service just a little bit, but it looks like we're back here, so people refresh. Okay. But anyway, here we go. Here's the first one. How do I explain to normal people that modern day liberals, Democrats, and conservatives, modern day liberals, and then in parentheses Democrats, and conservatives in parentheses Republicans, are both technically liberals? Differences?
Do you guys have thoughts on this? Do you think it matters that much to explain to people?
Yeah. Go ahead, David.
Oh no, go ahead, Matt. I'll jump in after.
I mean, I think I would draw distinctions. I think I would call conservative Republicans more sort of either authoritarians or fascists, depending on the nature of them, and I would call Democrats sort of, I mean, liberals, I don't really want to clean up that term or whatever, right? They are liberals. I guess, what are you going to say, David?
I mean, I think that generally this is one of the major tensions that we have right now, and this is different from like political messaging strategy, but it's a reality that, like, for example, our politics are material politics,
right?
And liberalism is an ideology that is based on idealism, that politics in the world is just a battle of ideals, right. And ideas, and we fundamentally disagree with that conception of politics. So in that case, right, liberals and conservatives, they operate in a similar worldview and like ideology, and I do think that we're going to have to find a way to, but this is a hard question to answer with a quick soundbite, because it's like this is also the political tension that we're facing in the United States and the UK, right? Where it's like Bernie Sanders and our movement is operating, within the Democratic Party or around the Democratic Party, and it's difficult to have such just opposed worldviews with people who are supposedly in your same camp. And I think that we're going to have to work on a way to articulate that going forward, because if we don't, it becomes very difficult. Because people, for example, think that socialists are just really liberals, right? And it's all just a kind of continuum. When it's not,
SJWs basically, that's what the popular imagination is, right?
exactly. And I think that we're going to have to break through that. I don't have an answer to that today. But I think it's a question that I think we're going to actually have to work on a lot. And I know it's difficult here because liberal is such a loaded word in the United States specifically too. It's so loaded. It's moved away from what it actually is, like as a philosophical and political and economic philosophy. I mean, hell, I'll be honest. I'm from the South. I call things that annoy me that are a little squishy liberal all the time, and it has nothing to do with the politics, right? It's like kind of like an Americanism. So I don't know. We're gonna have to do a lot of work to kind of bring that term back to earth.
Yeah, I think that I like that. I mean, yeah, but historically and philosophically, I get what you're saying. Like these are, like there isn't really a proper right and left in American politics. The only thing that would complicate is I do think that there is a left liberalism that has to be part of, the mix. Like someone like Amartya Sen is not a socialist, but he's a good left liberal, and he's certainly part of the mix. But yeah, and in other ways, like, questions like that, I'm not sure, like in day-to-day conversation, like, honestly, I think a kind of like these two parties represent corporate interests, like the kind of Adolf Reed frame of, do you want, okay, if the world is white supremacy capitalism or diversity capitalism, we obviously pick diversity capitalism, but what we fight for and what we want with some type of social democratic move is a world that really is about justice and dignity for people everywhere, and in all class positions. And that's sort of like the third position that is not represented in American politics. Let me take really quick from the Discord, then we'll get back to the super chats. What is the best way to get concessions from Biden and the DNC? Can we do a vote pact or something? What's most effective? I think we've talked about this a lot, and honestly, I really don't know right now. I think that there is some value.
Virus.
I think there's some value in looking at the idea of some type of petition around vote withholding, if in lieu of like a vice presidential pick and specific staffing. The platform is really overvalued in terms of its importance. Frankly, I really don't know. But I think the harder part of this question that everybody's going to be annoyed at me about is like, I think the bigger thing that we've got to deal with is recognizing that the left is weak in some really key ways. There's enormous opportunity, but we need to build to a point where we actually have power to do something like that. So, that's part of the project of this show. I would just say yes. I mean, I think if you're going to say like absolutely 1,000,000% you won't vote for the Democratic nominee, then you're not going to be in a position to get concessions, because why would you even think about that if that's like your opening, negotiating position? And then on the other hand, I mean, clearly the leadership of the Democratic Party is like opposed to our goal set. So anyways, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that.
I mean, it's just like, this is what I've been reading about and thinking about, and I'll have more on this later, but it's like, this is the tension of our political moment, in that like we have both in the UK and the United States, we had two leaders who really popularized a lot of ideas. They had a lot of people in their wake. We've been developing, media programs and some forms of political organizations that are growing, and we should be excited and promote them, but also recognize relatively to the the mass of the population are still fundamentally weak. So it's a difficult situation to figure out what our strategies need to be in the short term, but the long term, I think, is definitely going to have to be starting to articulate and build our own kind of structures and power that we can organize something, for example, like a vote, withholding our vote from a Democratic nominee in a way that would be, a threat that they would take seriously.
Right. A threat that's really the key thing, because just like a random reactive emotional position achieves nothing. And that's not even a value judgment. That's just the reality. So I'm never going to be a big like, oh yeah, go have a protest vote. It doesn't make any difference. I'll just add real quick to, I've never been like anti third party, but I've been pretty bored by most third party arguments. And I think nationally a third party is still basically irrelevant and just part of that protest vote thing. But I am more interested now in, what would a Labor Party look like in New York State? What would that actually mean to compete? And then conversely, is it a better vehicle to have, say, a Labor Party competing in Idaho or South Carolina, in areas where the Democratic Party brand, and maybe not in South Carolina, but maybe more like in Idaho or something where the Democratic Party brand is pretty toxic. So I think these are things that we have to look at. And I'm going to actually, this is a conversation we'll have with Adolph Reed pretty soon, because they did create a Labor Party in South Carolina in the 90s, and there might be some lessons there for us. All right, one other question from the Discord, then we'll get back to super chats. How can we come away from this pandemic stronger from this pandemic as a global society? There must be avenues that present a unique opportunity, as there always are. There's someone that's going to get there first. This is the real nod. I'm just going to kind of truncate that. Well, I really do think that there's something to, I think the framework that we've been trying to put across of global interdependence, national social democracies, and local resiliencies is at the very least a really clarifying framework. And I think some of the best things you are seeing right now are some combination of, at the very least, just, in the United States, just the clarity that, like, look, the so-called bailout was a giant corporate theft. Everybody failed, including Bernie Sanders on that. We have to be totally honest.
Yeah.
But it was a giant, robbery. And we can see in real time, basically almost every other society on earth doing a better job, if you're speaking from a US point of view. And so we have these real-time policy comparisons. And then I think that, we keep talking like the resiliency in supply chains, local efforts, those are going to actually be increasingly important. And I think it's going to present an interesting left alternative to resurgent nationalism. Because again, we can't just keep like denying where people are going. We have to actually provide a much more compelling answer to meeting those underlying needs. And I think in the kind of real local resiliency versus sort of imagined past is much more effective way of doing that. And then I think this is where the internet still is really positive. Like there is like a planetary conversation happening. We are talking even on this show, like across the globe, and really thinking like, how can this work best? Whether we're speaking east, west, north, south, as socialists, as human beings, as whatever. So I think the frameworks and the conversations are there. Seizing power and so on is the next thing. I think a million things are going to be generated out of this, and a lot of things will be really positive. It's just a question of what's being scaled. Right now, the negatives are being scaled, but the positives are there, right?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't know. I'm only having I'm looking at the bigger picture only just because I feel that way a lot more these days, just because I'm like, in my apartment all the time and I'm not out on the street. So I've been sort of thinking like the long form of history. And I think, the 2010s, they're starting to become a narrative that's becoming clearer and clearer about what that decade was about. And it was definitely a decade of an interesting strategy for the left, of a very kind of, I don't know, like it was a politics where we had like these symbols of, for example, Bernie or Corbyn, and we filled in a lot of meaning into them, and it meant a lot of different things to different people. And I think that going forward, we're going to have stronger conceptions of politics that aren't just so tied to what we're all bringing in our own heads as individuals to our political structures, and starting to act more in a uniform way, because it's not enough to just have one individual, right? Because when Bernie Sanders does something that makes us annoyed, it's hard for us to do anything about that. The same thing with Corbyn, right? And then also at the same time, when they're sort of held back, or when Corbyn's project sort of fell apart, or what happened with the DNC and Bernie Sanders in this most recent election, I don't know. It puts us in a difficult position because so much is weighted on individuals rather than mass movements. And we don't have, at least right now, a lot of different directions that we can go. So I think doing the kind of conceptual work that you were talking about is like how we need to think about politics and start framing what our goals are, is something that we definitely need to be doing. I also think that we need to be having a lot of conversations about what these kind of left movements, I'll call them left populism movements, were, and what that means for us going forward, what kind of model we need to be following, because there's some deficiencies along. And then, just on the other side of that too, you see the right wing just having victory after victory on with the most wild and incredible kind of candidates and policies, and just almost incoherent, incongruous politics. So I don't know. It's a difficult time to sort of situate ourselves in it, for sure.
I think, yeah, I'd just add real quick. I mean, I think that I really want to keep hitting this theme of, on cultural and interpersonal and levels like that, thinking much more, frankly, about being more compassionate, more appealing, getting rid of all the toxic bullshit and the endless bifurcation. And then on the flip side, when we're thinking about power and politics, really getting much more ruthless. I just want to just say, like, and you see this in like the stand versus cancel thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, AOC is somebody that there's so much triggering and so much energy around. And I'll just say again, I like AOC. I'm glad she's in Congress. I support her. Again, she's one of a handful of people in my life I've ever donated to. Okay. So I have like those bona fides. But there's like, she, like anybody else, is subject to healthy and smart critique.
Yeah.
And even like, people thinking of her as like a national figure, there's no proof that she is a nationally viable candidate yet at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if she wants to be, and if people want her to be, I think there's going to need to be a huge rethink in some of her approach to things. And I hope, like, I can just see, like, even in that conversation, it's either like, no, fuck her, blah, 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 in a way which I just think is not accurate or constructive. And then there's also like, how dare you? You're a hater, yada, yada, yada. And it's just like, no, this is just, and again, even in that micro level, like on a level of, actually, this is a young leader with a lot of stuff put on their shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
Figuring it out like everybody else. Let's actually be much more thoughtful and engaged. And then on the other hand, as part of like a broader power project, let's be real. Let's look at people's approval ratings. Let's look at a message that is a national message or a much, much more narrow message. And I think ultimately, like, the left is going to have to really start to get comfortable with the idea that there's bedrock, non-compromisable policy positions, but discourse, modes of appeal, building coalitions, all, like, the Joe Rogan thing's the perfect example. Like, look, if you want to go and you want to win, that can't even be a question. That just has to be what you do. Mm. And if you do want to do all of that, then just prepare to, a lot of people are going to suffer, because it's never going to be a serious national, let alone international project. It will be the preoccupation of a small group of people in media and so forth. And it won't have any connection to the real things in the world. And that's just not what we want. More super chats?
Yeah, we'll kind of skip through a few here, but I'll just combine two here from Anton Shields. But you have to say the people have failed as well, and then people are responsible too. Both have work to do. I'm not really sure what that means, but
I don't know what people have failed as well. Like, here's the thing with like this attitude. It's like, well, it's also just useless. It's like, that. Well, I don't know what that means. Like, what? Like, yeah. Okay. Like, look, I wish. People. Yeah, they're bad. They should read more. How dare you? And by the way, to the extent that like the people have quote unquote failed, which is just a very not, again, it's just, I'll just say it's an antithetical to socialism framing.
Right.
When anybody does it, there's people on our side. Like, how could the people in South Carolina, Joe Biden lied. He da 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 da. Like, no, the question you always have to ask, whether it is Democratic primary voters who didn't vote as we want them to vote, whether it is people who are checked out of the process, or whether it is some people who are voting for people like Trump for a broader set of reasons than the Republican base, is what are we doing wrong? And to the extent that we can even get into a conversation about like the broader populace and why maybe there's problems in terms of getting people ready for the moment, we have to look at a decades-long project of neoliberal assault on education.
Yeah.
Where people don't know history, people don't get educated about labor, people are not taught to read, people are exhausted, overworked, and completely disconnected from a sense of their own intellectualism, which is a very, that is a hegemonic effort of decades. And if we look at liberatory educators like Paulo Freire, they didn't say, well, the first thing I did when I started working with impoverished Brazilians was tell them that they were, dumb and should read more.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
It reminds me of this Brecht line. I think maybe Griscom said it before on the show, but it ends with this poem. Would it not, in that case, be simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another?
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so go ahead, David.
I was just going to say a quick line that, when people say things like, oh, these voters are voting against their interests, that's the wrong way to frame it. It's the wrong way to think about it. What you need to say is that, well, the people's interests are this, and why are they not lining up with the politics that we think will work out in the long run, right? It's like that different way of thinking about it. And just a quick example, a hypothesis. I'm not even saying that this is like what I think happened, but for example, with like older Black voters in South Carolina, let's just give like us like a very sympathetic view, say that they have a very sympathetic view of the Bernie Sanders movement. They could have voted for Biden, for example, because they recognized correctly, in my opinion, that the Democratic Party was going to do everything they could to undermine a Bernie Sanders candidacy. And if anyone went forward with the Bernie Sanders movement, there was a very big chance that the Democrats would actually undermine it to the extent that would allow Donald Trump to become the president. I'm not saying that's necessarily the right view, but like there's a whole myriad of possibilities in the way that people think and strategize that are not as simplistic of them just not being, not having the secret true knowledge that we all have, right? People very much are threatened by this administration, and they're trying to organize and think about the best way through it. And it's our responsibility to be, messaging and proving, as Ronan said last week on the show, when he said, we need to prove people that politics can change their lives. And a lot of people don't think that's a possibility.
Right. As well as, and frankly, as well as, plenty of other people who just don't, whose experience was actually really consistently bad for a very long period of time. And they don't have a meaningful difference in their own experience between Trump or Obama. That's also true. Like there's a lot of different variables. And, it's like, again, like, look, if the reason that Bernie hasn't pulled through, and I'll keep stipulating, I think he should stay in the race and let's keep fighting. Absolutely. But if the reason is that like, it's not looking good right now, to say the least, and 80% of it is because the cable channels were super PACs against him, because, President Obama got on the phones, like it, in a sense, especially from the perspective of work we do, it's like, the 10% that is relevant is what we have more control over. Those were the mistakes of the campaign. Those were the mistakes of people like us, because that's what we can control for right now to win in the future. And of course, we need to obviously aggressively point out, as an example, the obscene, disgusting role of CNN and MSNBC and so on, and Fox and all the rest. But we have to, be able to read. Like I read, Daniel Marin's piece in the Huffington Post about, the Sanders campaign coming apart. Some of it made total sense to me. They echo things we've said on this show. Some I kind of disagreed with, and some I was just kind of, I'll sit and reflect. But we can't just go to like, no. It's all their fault, because then we actually mirror, then we kind of replicate that, what Liz and I were talking about. It's like if it's all preordained, then there's no agency. And so we have to figure out how to have dynamism with people. And one thing I will say, when you listen to people who identify as right-wing populists, and there's so much, like honestly, if we were in fighting shape, I really don't think that guys like Steve Bannon would be that hard to beat. There's so much bloviating. There's so much nonsense. And it's really, at the end of the day, not even that, the economics aren't even really there. But they do not, they are, when the group that they define of as their mass, they treat really fucking well, rhetorically. And they have a lot of rhetorical nods to them. We need to replicate that. So I the kind of like liberal, they don't read, they don't get it, is just tactically never going to align with a mass-based project.
Mm-hmm.
All right, got a few more here. Patrick Stevens almost used this money to place a takeout order for a ribeye at Uncle Jack's Steakhouse until I remembered that left is best. Thank
Left
you,
is
Patrick.
best.
Sounds good though. Midi Doctor says not flush at the moment. Oh, thank you, Midi Doctors. If you guys aren't flush at the moment, this is reference to your bank accounts, don't do super chats, but we appreciate it, Midi Doctors.
Word.
Leslie Petty, thanks for continuing to move the message. Anthony Fauci, apparently watching the stream. Please debunk this right-wing talking point. The left says government is corrupt and bad, but they want more of it. Leftists must be hypocrites.
Oh, that's a really old one. I mean, I guess that's like, I mean, if you want to just do like the really dumb analogy, like, you know, this restaurant is bad, so I don't want to eat food ever. I mean, it's exactly. You know, it's just silly. I mean, what does that even mean? Like,
I mean, it's like
the imperial and like coercive functions of the state are bad, and the sort of welfare functions are good.
Yeah, it's really not that complicated. And if you're worried, and what's funny, of course, from like the silly kind of libertarian stuff is that all of the most coercive, you know, surveillance-driven stuff is going to get replicated in the so-called free market or the private sector without any of the benefits to the public sector. So just support an open democratic society, and an open democratic society will include healthcare for all, parks, powerful public unions, workers' cooperatives, and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Got one from Eric O here. Keep it up, guys. Week off coming to an end. Back in the hospital tomorrow. Good luck, Erica. Can I get an impression of Obama bragging about being number one ebook during Ebola? Number one on Facebook. Sorry, number one on Facebook during Ebola.
You know, if you think about it, Facebook it represents something. You know, it's not. I looked at it. It was very nice. It was very nice that. While the Ebola was happening, I actually had, what was it, like 35 million likes. And to me, you know, that means something.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually, you know, that's a very wonderful thing. The people, they don't want to talk about it, but, you know, maybe I will talk about it. And what we're going to do is we're going to come under the model. I'm not involved with the models.
Oh, Jesus.
At least not that type of model. Yeah. I haven't laughed that hard in weeks.
That was incredible.
Crown, king.
Well, speaking of that, we do have somebody who just repeated one of his lines. What was it here? Oh, Nathan Lyon says, Biden's probably not even watching right now, and if he is, he doesn't understand what he's watching. It's true about this stream, definitely. Okay, we got another question from Anthony Fauci, who should probably get back to the pandemic response, but... please debunk this argument. This is another familiar one. Socialism, communism has never worked and kills millions. How do we differentiate between authoritarianism, destroy destiny? Well, I would say that's why democratic socialism is good, but what do you guys have to say?
Well, if we're going to do a balance sheet, obviously capitalism has certainly been responsible for millions of deaths. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, I mean, look, I think I think there is something smart about making the authoritarian versus open distinction. And, you know, this is really basic, easy historical stuff. It doesn't take that hard. It's not, you know, let's just be really simplistic. Costa Rica is a pretty successful social democracy in Latin America. Okay. It's certainly got its problems, but especially for a place with its, you know, its region, its GDP or whatever, it has, you know, it has universal health care. It has some really high performance and social standards, and no one questions that it's a democracy. Chile was run by Pinochet as a fascist dictatorship for, you know, at least for well over a decade, and had the most hyper capitalist market reforms imaginable. You know, Singapore is certainly not an open democracy. It's aggressively capitalist. So, you know, we don't even need to get into the more complicated cases to show that obviously some forms of democratic socialism are more compatible with open democracies. And also, you know, ultimately, if you read the Hayeks of the world and the von Mises, they're very anti-democratic because they recognize if you have a robust democratic process, you're not going to have a market for everything, and you're not going to just give rich people unlimited power. This is also why people should read Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains. I mean, literally the only valid argument about this is people from a Keynesian or social democratic perspective advocating for robust protections in a mixed market. And that's a whole other debate and worthy conversation. But anybody that's just like markets and capitalism lead to freedom they're just totally historically illiterate. They don't have any base to stand on whatsoever.
Yeah, and I'd also just quickly say that democracy is more fundamentally compatible with socialism than capitalism.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think one, you have to understand too, and you're looking at the history of communism and socialism, that most of the people who are very interested in telling those stories are horrible right wingers who wanted to portray the most biased and ridiculous view. But these are conversations that are going to be difficult to have in the United States, just because we are so. When we teach Animal Farm, for example, as an argument against socialism, despite the fact that Orwell himself was a socialist, right? I mean, like
they edited him identifying as a democratic socialist out of the intro text of that.
Yeah, actually. Exactly. It's just like all of those politics. There's so many issues with them. I will just say that I think that in the long run of history, though, like the socialist and communist regimes did a lot of good, and I think that should be held up as well. Wow, I was rereading some of my older work, just personal writings, and I've written some stuff about Cuba, specifically about some of the issues with like human rights when it comes to like media and press freedoms. And I made an argument then that I really like now. It's like, I think when we criticize those systems, it should come from a place that, like, if you want to be on the socialist side, that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and internally. So it's like, yeah, if we want these, if we want, socialism, that also comes with these kind of rights that we understand, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and all of that. But we don't need to look at things as like one kind of blanket view of history, right? So it's like in Cuba, there are issues and significant issues when it comes to freedom of the press. But hell, this tiny island nation has provided for its people on a level that's unheard of in any other society. And today, they're putting the capitalist world to shame by just being 5 steps ahead of everyone else when it comes to dealing with this health crisis.
No, there's no doubt about that. And also, again, this is like the thing that people don't like to deal with, but we cannot even measure. And I think it's a mistake to, to have a rosy romantic view of any government is problematic. But at the end of the day, like, you just can't judge the trajectory of Cuba or Venezuela or any number of places without the context of just a relentless economic, political, and intelligence hybrid war against them from the most powerful country on earth. So, it's just it's funny because the kind of pseudo sophisticated view you hear a lot is like, oh, well, we've already heard that, and we don't need, you can't just blame the United States for everything. And that's true. There's other variables besides U.S. foreign policy. But at the same time, it's actually like stunningly naive and childish and not realistic to not say, yes, a lot of multiple variables matter. And probably the most significant one is by far the most powerful force on earth, waging economic warfare against you. And one thing that people on every side of the equation should be thinking very attentively about is particularly when we look at Latin America in 2020, which is that Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela have survived this incredible U.S. onslaught. Mm-hmm. And the Workers' Party was undermined in a coup. Evo Morales was removed in a coup. Manuel Zelaya was removed in a coup. You see some tremors around AMLO. Go back to the 70s and look at the difference again between Cuba versus Chile or Jamaica. And so you really then actually have to ask the next question, which is that if you're under total U.S. bombardment, do you even have the capacity to start to build open liberal institutions, which we all would generally support, and we do. But you just, again, you got to keep it real, and especially in 2020, there's a reason why certain governments have been more resilient against these onslaughts than others. And what's depressing is because they've held lines they've needed to hold. So if you have a problem with that, then you should have a problem with U.S. foreign policy.
And I just add two quick things. One, specifically, Cuba, there's been massive strides just in the past decade. Their new constitution has done a lot of actually rectifying some of those issues. And, if you're a Marxist, right, you should believe that societies actually, are progressing in the context of where they are. So it's like, 1960s, 1970s, Cuba policy is going to be on a different level than it is today, just because, like, for example, the United States was actively trying to invade the country. While the United States is trying to choke them off economically, they have a little bit more breathing room today after the second shock when the Soviet Union collapsed. So I would just add that real quick. And then the second thing, is just really fast, is that also hold the capitalist model up to that standard as well. Neoliberalism has been the dominant ideology in the Western capitalist societies, in Japan. And I'm sorry, you look at it now and it's being shown to be a complete failure. It has been unable to deliver any of the ideas that it was supposed to, and you're actually seeing people's standards of living declining. I mean, it's a system that is clearly in decline. So if you're going to take any kind of long historical view of socialism and communism, you also need to be doing the exact same thing with capitalism. And the verdict there is becoming clearer and clearer.
No, the verdict there is totally clear. And to the extent we have countries that are remotely tiptoeing up to these standards that people put in place, they are in fact mostly European social democracies and some Latin American social democracies, which are not to be valorized because of their foreign policies and everything else. But like the United States is clearly not a functioning democracy at the very least, let alone even what we do outside. I mean, we're a shithole country. We are run by mediocrities and sociopaths. You have people getting, their families can't even track where they are during this corona crisis. There's no democratic accountability whatsoever. And the main opposition party is like, oh, let's use this as an opportunity to do a suburban tax rebate on people's houses.
And look fiscally responsible. Also.
We are not even in the core, let alone what we do in the peripheries, which we just spent time talking about. We're completely eroded. Now, the only thing I reject is I I think people who don't want to, on some level, protect so-called open values and democratic societies, I reject, because I think that is something. I think that's first of all, I think that's a universal aspiration, and I think that some of those results we're still taking advantage of if we're in Brooklyn versus, say, Hungary as an example. So I'm not willing to let go of those goals at all. And I do think they're most compatible with socialism, but I'm also not willing to tell a bedtime story about where they exist versus other places, because they most certainly do not.
One more on this line from Daniel Ryan. How can you justify Cuban re-education camps?
I mean, this is like one of those things where it's like, oh, in Cuba, when they teach kids to read, they praise the society in it. And I just sit there and I say, like, Jesus Christ, when I was a kid growing up, not only did I pledge allegiance to the United States flag every morning, in Texas, you actually have to pledge allegiance to the state of Texas as well, right? And that was a fundamental part of my education. I mean, I don't know. It's funny to me that, like, the secondary kind of the way that we look at these, like, we are bathed in ideology from the minute we're born until we become, like, educated, honestly, in this society. I can't watch football without some kind of praise to the United States military. I mean, how, like, disconnected those two ideas should be, and we just find that to be something completely natural because we've been enculturated to it. I don't know. I think
also people should ask the question of why a literacy campaign was needed post Batista, which might be a more interesting question than, like, how can you defend certain terrible things that happened in a revolutionary period.
I mean, that's like, right. That's the other thing is we don't defend all of those things. We critique them, but I'm also again, it's just born. First of all, I'm quite sure that whoever's asking the question doesn't have a full understanding of what those things were. Now, some of them, and particularly in the beginning, there was just objectively abuses that we would oppose and critique. And by the way, you can read exchanges with Castro where he will, and to be fair, with foreign journalists and outside intellectuals, but he will engage on these subjects at length, including in criticism of his own record.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, guys, like, I'm sorry, I know people don't like to do this, but you have to historicize it. All of the Cuban revolutionaries were very familiar with what happened in Guatemala in the 1950s, where a very nice social democratic government took power under Jacob Arbenz. And they were like, what we're going to do is we're not going to just be a serf country for United Fruit and the CIA and a handful of families that run the country like a literal medieval fiefdom. And they were removed in a brutal CIA, coup that has consequences. It reverberates through today in terms of the United States backing like narco governments today for basing and all these things you see across Latin America. So they looked at that situation and they said, we're going to be tough, and we're going to actually sort of, build an infrastructure around what we're doing. And again, if you have a problem with that, you either need to look at that globally, whether you're talking about the United States or Saudi or China or Cuba, or you have to look at the very historical specifics of how a little island 90 miles off of the coast of Florida has somehow managed to survive this incredible experiment while being terrorized by the United States for decades.
Move through a bit more here. Let's see, where should I start?
I got one from the Discord, which is how do leftists make centrists love them? Should we keep trying? And why do they hate us? Is this like good?
They don't have a constituency. Who cares?
It's like what Jay Carney the other day was complaining about how mean people were being on Twitter.
Well, here's though the really big thing with the left, right? Here's like the Adolf Reed point. And this is like the really tricky thing, which is there's barely any constituency for this. Like this overeducated, like liberal, whatever constituency is a very small part of the population. It's disproportionate influence because of cultural capital, but it's a super small part of the population. So yes, there's a lot of other avenues to reach out to a much broader set of people. But what does that mean? Well, it means that you have to like be comfortable with the Joe Rogans of the world. Now, again, I'll keep reiterating that if somebody said, okay, and therefore we're going to oppose the rights, justice, and protection of trans people, or we are going to, agree with like ICE detention policies. Well, to me, those are like first and fundamental principles. And I am a liberal in those senses, right? That is a form of liberal politics that we absorb and we're willing to carry on. Absolutely, because it's correct. Now, on the flip side, I think rhetorical demands. I think, no, this is not the time where you sell people on open borders. It's not even a viable policy at the moment. All it is rhetorically alienating to people, where you really ruthlessly reassess, like, what is the difference between serious policy platforms and social and rhetorical practices that are just alienating to most people, and also what you put on the upfront. And what you put on the upfront is universal material concerns that affect the overwhelming majority of people in clear, simple, relatable terms. So, we can skip them, but we're going to have to interrogate ourselves and be smarter strategically if we want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's on point.
All right, here, Akim Oniram says, Corona has shown me the left needs to stress how America can't ensure basic delivery systems. We need to keep talking about universal guarantees like healthcare for all, living wages, better utilities. I think that's why the failed state word has been coming around a lot.
We are a failed state.
Yep.
Capitalism makes this country a failed state.
Yeah, can't do it, folks. William Magnant, need national popular vote and proportional representation. Yes, that's correct. Nine Tails Cosmic Fox says, even if there are equal arguments for a model of profiteering versus humanitarian goals, is it fair to say that critical mass favors the latter? Yeah, but we don't have proportional representation in a national popular vote, so Yeah, definitely people prefer, humanitarianism versus profiteering. I think generally there's much more humans than profiteers. Let's see here. In a world full of panic and anxiety, says Aisha Ahmad, and too much change too fast, could you please bring back your old opus? We'll use it for some stuff, I'm sure. But I really like the new one.
I love the new one. I love the old one too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The old one served us good. That was
Mix it
like
up.
a year and a half at least.
Yeah, I mean that was
like 2, I think.
And still all of our interstitials, DJ Danarchy.
Yeah, John Rueda, workers have a slim win right now in which to seize power, boycott, assemble, and general strike now. Okay.
Definitely, and I mean, to the extent we're doing it. We're gonna have on Chris Smalls, who organized the Amazon boycott. We're gonna have him on Tuesday. Yeah, rent strikes. All of these things are happening right now. The question is, can they be made synchronized and coherent?
Shit. Mm-hmm. I'm losing internet.
Are you losing them? I can read a couple.
No, I mean I can still record all this stuff. I can't. I'm not uploading.
Oh, we're off.
We're off.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. It might be back. Okay. Give it. Yeah. Okay. It looks like it's recovered. Okay. So yeah, I want to move through some more of these super chats.
Yep. Keep them going.
All right. So hey, folks, thanks for refreshing. Here we go. Let's move through a few more. William Turner, no message there. Thanks, William.
Thank you, William. Best kind of super chat.
That's a Post Citizens United super chat there.
That's right. I need to see. You know what? I need to be my fairy. Smack myself on the knuckles right there.
Seek the Siren. Any thoughts on the UK Labour NEC? Do you guys know about this?
Well, I mean, Keir Starmer won. Rebecca Long Bailey, who was the candidate we supported, she was representing the left, lost. But Paul O'Connell, who we did a deep dive with on an illicit history, as well as Ronan Burtonshaw, I think have really good handles on this. But one of the things that Paul O'Connell was saying was just like, it's kind of like the drum I'm beating, which is that, yes, of course, like right now, today, this second, we need to be educating, we need to be advocating, we need to be supporting every single type of action that is taking place, from strikes to protecting migrant communities to everything else. And at the same time, like his perspective was kind of that the left needed to go back into some like strategic reformation. Now, not retreat into like factionalism and subculturalism and leave the electoral domain, but he was really like, yeah, like very likely Starmer is going to get it. We have to recognize that this, like the last election was a major defeat, and we need to really rethink what we're doing here. One thing that's interesting is that Starmer, like, the only top line though is it's like some people are really emphasizing that Starmer has kept some of the kind of Corbynite policy pledges, which is great. But I've also seen that he's doing a purge. Like he's doing what they've always accused the sort of Corbynites of doing, which they never really did, which is kind of getting rid of some people and consolidating power. And that's, it's worth noting. But on the other hand, I mean, the Labour Party and the unions around the Labour Party still form a stronger institutional basis for the left in the UK than we have in the United States in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add to that and say specifically to O'Connell's point that there's a lot of questions about strategy, and that's what everyone's talking about right now, especially there. It was a very sad defeat, but I think this is the kind of problem that we're having in the UK and especially in the United States. For example, like let's say Bernie Sanders becomes the president. We have to deal with the Democratic Party apparatus that doesn't belong to us. And that's a factor that we need to understand, that we had these movements that sort of sprinted past the institutions that were necessary to maintain power. And I think that there's a kind of articulation and re-theorizing that needs to be done. I worry sometimes talking to some of my UK friends that just like the kind of the myriad of different people and like ideologies that made up the Corbyn project, that it's difficult for some people to even to be able to look backwards and see where the mistakes were, where they made mistakes on Brexit, where they made mistakes on some of these kind of, like too pie in the sky of a manifesto, or at least the way that it was laid out, for example. I don't know. It's just like there's a difficulty there that we're also going to be having here too. It's like there's just so many moving pieces that created these coalitions that it's hard to kind of to give a diagnosis after the fact. But that's exactly what we need to be doing while continuing to do the work. For example, too, it's not just like returning back into a room and like reading recent histories. It's like continuing to do the work, but actually being able to have the reflection. I don't think we have these institutions right now that are able to do that kind of thinking, and we need that desperately.
Yeah.
All right. Edward Conrad says, how can the left capitalize on lack of trust in government? Polls show people hate Congress, etc., but our movement hasn't captured that mainstream disaffection.
Well, it goes back to what I was suggesting earlier. Like I love Bhaskara's line about being the pre-mainstream. You know, we have to synthesize, and of course there is a synthesis there, because there is, like, of course you're bringing in ideas, you're advocating for interests that are not in the quote unquote mainstream yet. That is part of the task. And then the extension of that task is actually packaging it and absorbing the outside too. So it's a reciprocal relationship. So you have the task of actually winning mainstream politics. So I think right now the focus really does need to be, on the left, actually building that real mass appeal project. It should be all like Nas's clothing line, mass appeal. And also I would say too, that just as when Bernie was losing primaries and people were like, yeah, but look at the polls, most Democrats support all these good policies, that was just a bedtime story and not helpful, and in my opinion at all, because who cares about the overturn window when you're losing? Just as I would say that, I actually do think on the flip side, several weeks into this crisis, the poll numbers that are starting to show things like support ticking up for Medicare for all in this context are really different than somebody voting against Bernie Sanders and vaguely saying, well, yeah, but I like a nice policy. People are going to start to migrate to these policies right now. And this is like horrible. This is really depressing and awful, but because they're getting exposed to material conditions that they have not been exposed to before. And it's sad. It's horrible. We would never wish for it this way, because I think we're all, frankly, humanitarian enough to not want acceleration of circumstances. And like, here we are. We're literally here. So there is going to be a strong uptick in things like the desire for Medicare for all because of just what the hell is happening.
All right. Anna Bird, retired, says Boris Johnson has been admitted to the hospital. Wow.
Oh, wow.
Jesus.
No hurt for him.
Yeah. Okay, so I go back to where we started here. Let's see here. What do you say? Oh, here's one. Julian Franks. What's worse, slurs like Karen or the Iraq War?
Well, definitely Karen.
Obviously Karen. I mean, that's something that we really need.
One of them killed people and the other.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, the Iraq War was an innocent mistake of multicultural exchange, and Karen is literal violence.
Yeah. I think you sort of answered Shiv Saksena's question about how much social conservatism is acceptable to build a wider labor coalition with the Rogan thing.
I think people really need to start rethinking in terms of like third way, moderate, like those types of words don't do it, or even just like openness versus closeness, because openness versus closeness is a much broader, like you're really saying, like I say in my book, I have one line of like, the preoccupation is taking care of people being materially terrorized, essentially so they can live different kinds of lives they want to live, of which we have nothing to say about. Like, you want to have a super traditional family and go play baseball and eat apple pie? Awesome. I want you to have a house, health care, and safety. You want to live like in a Wiccan cult and like, do polyamory? Cool. Do your thing. This is not the preoccupation of my politics. Beyond, obviously, and again, I'm going to put this in really tight language of like, literal like legal civil rights for all. I think those are the areas where it's like not compromisable. But you know, a lot of the stuff that has gotten so, you know, I think cultural practices, it's not even a question. Like people do whatever cultural practices they want in terms, but that is not going to be the basis on which you build mass politics.
Well, that's why I just wanted to say, like, I don't know if I would agree with the framing of the question as to like how much social, like as a dial, like how much social conservatism are we going to have in our movement? I think the Joe Rogan example is perfect for what we're talking about. Joe Rogan has some views, for example, when it comes to trans people that are odious and they're bad and they're wrong, in my opinion. But what happened with the Joe Rogan endorsement was this person who speaks to millions of people is saying that he thinks that the Bernie Sanders message and the Bernie Sanders idea and the politics that we're building are what inspires him. It wasn't Bernie Sanders saying, hey, Joe, like, I'm going to change everything that I believe. We're going to change the makeup of our politics to include you in it. It was just a sign that our politics were reaching people across the country, which is what our politics should be doing.
And that's why they couldn't tolerate it.
So what I'm saying is, like, we never played up, for example, Bernie Sanders never played up some kind of social conservatism to get.
Absolutely.
Well, that's 100% right. And that is the most basic and most important point. But also it is going to be like, you know, again, like it is going to have to be a comfort level of, and I think actually really specifically, because I looked into this writing about it, like Joe Rogan does not support any discriminatory legislation or laws against transgender people. That is a really clear baseline and distinction to make. And then it's like, yeah, honestly, on a personal level of like what I think, and it's funny because I'm like, you know, Mr. like left Joe Rogan defender all of a sudden. There's tons of things that I've heard Joe Rogan say on a fucking myriad of issues that I disagree with.
Yeah. You're on record disagreeing.
Like literally on record disagreeing very strongly with. Now, there's tons now because it's part of like something like actually a really talented host was a lot of different, is all over the place in a way that most people are. There's tons of things I think he said that are awesome and I want to fucking amplify. But like, that's the other part though, is it's just like, yeah, I don't know. Like the comfort level of there's going to be disagreements. There is going to be different assumptions. You might even have the experience in politics of knowing like we're both going to fight for this common endeavor, whether organizing a workplace or getting a candidate elected or going to a specific protest. And we're then going to go back to our specific spaces that are more like closed spaces than politics and have some pretty fucking different beliefs and ideas about the world. And that's okay. Like this project of trying to control and police that needs to be done with, because it's weaponized to always undermine like political efforts. And it's unachievable. And it's also unhealthfully hegemonic, because I really think like you go back to the impulse of liberation at its root really does have to do with the idea that like no one should be policing ultimately the boundaries of who you are, what your cultural practices are. Like that is where, again, I really want to say, like, I think I am a liberal in that sense, that there is a legal and political polity that generates enough actual legal safety to allow one to be in the world. And then that's kind of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm a radical, and I think that there's a lot of kind of cultural systems that need to be torn down, and that's a part of my politics too. But I will say that I think it's really important that we recognize, for example, the ability of Chase Bank, the ability of Wells Fargo, the ability of Raytheon to traverse these kind of like woke spaces and to like give acknowledgement to certain groups and certain ideas, and how they're able to use those kind of politics to push forward some of the most horrific neoliberal and imperialist politics. And to recognize that there's a culture that's developing in the United States right now, which is sort of separated actually in a lot of ways from actual like material liberations for oppressed groups, and actually about covering the asses of HR departments and elites, right, and excusing them and giving them the ability to be a privileged, wealthy person and to find themselves as actually the people on the bottom of society, when most, a lot of these people are at the top. I think it's important that we recognize that in our politics, and not fall into the trap, though, of our recognition of that into some kind of social conservatism, which I don't think that that's a major tendency. Actually,
I don't, because again, though, I think though, but if the problem is that what gets called at times, like I've just seen very few living examples of like actual calls for social conservatism.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I think like we cannot confuse social openness or not trying to mandate specific ways of being as social conservatism. Like I think, and then I'd also would say, and I think this is where the conversations that we have, particularly with Joshua Kahn Russell, I just think in the spaces of dismantling structures that might be more psychic or emotional or whatever, I think a lot of that domain is like spiritual and introspective work. And because a lot of these political tools, like, again, we just see their functionality, like, and that is like what they're being used as. And I also would, I think that I mean, there's a lot to tease out, but I also, in general, there just needs to be a much higher comfort level with people's, different zones of where they want to be in social spaces across the board.
Well, I mean, kind of related to that, are you guys going to listen to the Red Scare interview with Bannon?
I listened to half of it. Boring. I mean, honestly, like the thing I would say is like, I think that they actually did a totally fine job of showing that he's pretty boring. I don't know if that's how they would interpret what they did. It doesn't matter to me. I think that, again, this is another thing. Like, this guy is a mass figure. Mm-hmm. In his case, he's not a neutral figure. Like, that's someone who does need to be confronted and competed against aggressively. But the idea, like, this isn't like somebody who's got like 3 Twitter followers and writes like stupid blog posts and they're going to get amplified. This is somebody who helped elect somebody president of the United States. And, I definitely heard, like, a big takeaway I had was, okay, you talk all this populist stuff. Why don't you support single payer? And basically he just ended up like, I mean, basically, honestly, actually basically sounding like a Democrat, which is kind of funny with all of his like prevaricating and bullshit. I do think that the left can be much more confident in, like, look, if I interviewed Steve Bannon, it would be a different flavor of interview. But I think that there's no, like, if even that interview, which wasn't aggressive, but it was not just agreeing, they asked him questions. He didn't look great. He sounded, frankly, really boring. Like, we can have the confidence to engage in that. That's a good thing. Like, wherever this there's some notion that develops somehow that we can't be out there, like, taking on these battles. And I got to tell you too, I'm not somebody who like pops off on, social, but about these sort of things. But some people then like, are very concerned about like, having these kind of debates with somebody like Bannon, arguments, but then also kind of talk about being ready to do like a different, much more aggressive mode of politics, right? And it's like baby steps, like start with all aggressive modes of politics. So I didn't hear all of it. From what I heard, he didn't sound impressive to me. And I think that, honestly, why help someone like that cultivate a mystique? I mean, this is just some fucking baby boomer who, I mean, look, I wish that Steve Bannon had the success he wanted to have in the 80s, because he wouldn't be fucking being a massive pain in the ass today, right? Like, that's my interpretation. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to listen to it.
I mean, I wasn't too interested.
If something pops off online and there's a clip, maybe I'll watch that. But no.
Also, Bannon's been sidelined too. Like, he definitely had his hand in what's going on today. But I think that the right's developing in different directions too. Like, if what I'm saying is, like, if there's people to be like looking at to sort of understand what the right's strategy are, I think that there's probably or different
Tucker's
areas.
more
start
relevant.
looking. I think
Tucker's
Tucker's
more
probably
relevant.
yeah.
I mean, Tucker's somebody, and again, I really think these guys are totally beatable with the right kind of message. That is a universalist one, a fundamentally anti-racist one, and a materialist one. I have no doubt. And I, you know, I think like I genuinely think the attitude can be a lot more confident. So I didn't have a problem with them doing that.
All right. Do you want to do a couple more here?
Sure.
Let's see. We got Artificial Morphosman says in this primary, many states, all polls, including exit polls, had Bernie in the lead. DNC flipping machines to Biden. Your thoughts? I am not. I want to see more reporting, I guess, on it. What do you guys have to say?
Same.
Yeah, same. Although I do want to just say, like, I think, you know, clearly lines and where people had to wait and stuff like that, that's been very well reported.
Yeah, I would.
People to vote during the coronavirus is very well reported. People ask me this. I honestly, like, I'm waiting to see more reporting. And this might sound like, look, if we had the documents, we would talk about it. Mm-hmm. There's also some truth that, like, if you want us to go out with something like that, and there's actual systemic evidence of it, not just like these things that can be explained away, like, yeah, exit polls don't always reflect, you know, final polls and stuff like that. We've known that for a very long time. Mm-hmm. The Sanders campaign would have to jump on it, frankly. Mm-hmm. Like there would need to be like an opening, as well as more reporting on it.
Yeah, like I don't mind people being very wary of whether their vote's being counted correctly. I think it's much better to maybe get involved in the democratic ballot counting process, or whatever you can do with your local parties to maybe be a whistleblower on stuff like that and see it for yourself. But outside of like specific, just like looking at exit polls that you could read in the paper and saying this looks a bit weird isn't enough work for me, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so Edward Conrad says BS campaign needs to become national organizing vehicle.
The Bernie Sanders campaign definitely needs to figure out how to transition to some type of serious institutional base.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that is, but not like our revolution is great, but not like a electoral find local candidates vehicle, but something more analogous to what you see in the UK or the organizations around the Workers' Party in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly what needs to be happening. And and if he's going to not complete that project, that is like probably the number one goal of the left in the short term.
Definitely.
Okay, let's see. Another media criticism related question from Peter McLaughlin here. I know y'all are friends of Crystal and Rising, but I worry that the focus on centrists and Biden and let the right, I think, is letting the right and Trump off the hook too much.
I can only speak for when I go on. I know I hit Trump. I probably hit Trump more on that show than I do on this show, frankly. I think Crystal has been very consistent. Both every platform I've ever done with her, she hits Republicans really hard. And Saagar, who's a friend, and Saagar obviously has very different politics. I mean, that goes without saying. So, yeah, I mean, and also the thing I will say too, like, it is stunning. How much are you giving people to work with? I mean, if the Democrats could not even come up with 20% of a bailout bill, frankly, you know, and so,
yeah, I agree.
I hear that concern. I think it's not reflective of Crystal. Right. And I think Saagar has different politics, and that's totally transparent. And I also think, like, and again, I'll keep saying this until I'm blue in the face. I want the centrist Democrats to have competence. I want them to be in a position to win against Donald Trump. I think that that's actually a big problem. But if you're concerned about that, then get concerned about that.
All right. It looks like we got two more here. John Rueda is a joke about Boris Johnson, but I'll read it because It's in pounds, so £5 he paid to say Boris Johnson taken to hospital. Looks like herd immunity is working. So there you go. And Julian Frank says Gen Z is here, or Gen Z here. What the is a Dr. Drew? What's Dr. Drew been in the news for? I missed it.
Didn't he say some bullshit about Corona or something?
I mean, probably.
He's like he's obviously one of these fake doctors who pushes the vision on. I don't know what he did recently.
Is he literally a fake doctor? Let's ask the legal department.
No, he's just like a guy who got.
Isn't he some guy who like literally? I think Artie Lang, like somebody was like that. This guy was like somebody accused him of trying to like get people to have relapses on whatever like celebrity addiction.
There is
like,
actually
like he's a scumbag.
The celebrity addiction show. There's a lot there actually. That
want to look up. So what he did was what all these idiots did, like Elon Musk as well. Just basically saying that it's not a big deal and it's press panic.
Yeah, I love that. I love like Elon saying the coronavirus panic is dumb, because that's a statement that like actually is technically true, that a panic by definition can't be smart, right? You say, but like all these engineer bros like smart bro, pretty wise. Look at this guy, and then look what happens. He's trying to like give CPAP machines to work as ventilators and as a
mechanics. I mean, that was such a classic Elon thing, by the way. Promise
classic Musk.
I can give you $1 million. I can give you. It's easy to make ventilators. Then he doesn't have the capacity to make the ventilators. Then he donates something, some form of ventilators that cannot be used in this crisis.
Yeah.
And everybody misses it because the only thing that people saw was Elon Musk. I'm donating ventilators to New York City.
That's his entire job, though. That's the real work Elon Musk does, is to chase headlines and moments, looking busy as this like impresario to innovation, and so he can get like dumb money on the line.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a scumbag.
He is, and for how long? I mean, people used to have fucking breakdowns when we would do segments about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Like deep emotional attachment to this guy. And that's another reason, like, that is basically as embarrassing as people who worship Donald Trump.
No, 100%.
Like Donald Trump, like it's the same thing. Donald Trump is worse because Donald Trump is the president, and so he's causing more harm. But like the mindset of worshiping these people, like I wouldn't say you should worship Samara Machel or even like these amazing, admirable people that we do illicit histories on. I don't think you should worship anybody. But I also think like one, the target of the worship, the Trump, the Musks, is fucking embarrassing. And two, like how many people think like, oh, look at Donald Trump. Like Elon Musk, there's a guy who's really innovative. Like, shut up. Grow the fuck up. You're not going to be it's going to be us or nobody that saves us. It's certainly not going to be some fucking like South African diamond heir, whatever the hell his heir, wherever the hell, I don't even remember how
Emerald, I think.
Emerald Money or whatever, who's I mean, honestly, in his case, the only thing that's human about him is like how desperately insecure he is.
Yes.
How much he wants to be loved.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's sad.
One final one, I missed and see the question part of this, but La Fine Absolute du Monde says, new music is dope. Have you seen Maduro's open letter to the American people? Have you guys seen this? There's a calling for peace, I believe, and like a reduction of sanctions or something. Maybe we'll talk about that on Tuesday.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I mean, we talk, Michael, we talked about this, Abby. It was like what we've continued to do to Venezuela, and the situation is just so inhumane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's obscene. I mean, and that's another like really good example of, you want to see what the trajectory of the Bolivarian project from Hugo Chavez to Nicolas Maduro would be, then don't try to have coups constantly since 2002, and don't, run a relentless propaganda and media war and economic war. And by the way, and the real takeaway from all of these places too is that always that like the legitimate critics of, say, a Maduro, the people who have actual smart and important and necessary criticisms of the serious failings of these governments are always people who are adamantly opposed to U.S. imperialism and intervention.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
You got any more?
There's no more on the super chat.
There's no more on the shoot. All right, guys, got like another 2 minutes if anybody else wants to come in.
We got one from like a few that aren't questions, but just comments. Ethan Weiss says, keeping me sane, much love. Kowalski from Nebraska, thanks for the content. Hope your financial situation holds firm in these historic times. Solidarity, M4L.
Indeed.
Oh, I mean, we have another one from Anthony Fauci.
Yes.
Destiny says Michael is a, quote, idiot. Thoughts? I skipped that one first, but, I guess since we're looking for one.
No.
Yeah,
I don't have any thoughts.
None of us really think deeply about that. Kowalski in with one that says worship the mustaches. Okay, we are very facial hair, the facial hair show.
There's grooming.
I think a lot of people are doing the facial hair now. I'm seeing some mustaches from my friends. You gotta mess around with it
in these times.
We have another comment on re-election rigging. Jennifer Cohn on BMD voting machines. Also check TMDS research on exit polling versus actual vote in primaries, especially Michigan. Okay.
Sure.
That. Let's see if anything else come in here.
Somebody did say in the chat, I thought it was funny, if our boy Corbyn was PM, he definitely wouldn't be dying of corona.
Oh my God!
Boris
is going to be a martyr.
Johnson would be a little bit more blustery. By the way, everybody check out my conversation with Navarra Media. I should have plugged that. That was a lot of fun. Shouts to Aaron Bastani and Michael Walker. We'll have Paul O'Connell soon, and I would be reading of course, reading Jacobin, but I would be reading Tribune all the time if you're interested in what's happening in the UK and just good global politics coverage. I really think Ronan Burton Shaw is a really, really sharp guy, really good ship there. Hopefully we'll have Grace Blakely on at some point too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's great. Her recent book is Stolen is really good too if you're looking for a really great overview of what's happened the past 30, 40 years.
Oh, nice.
Sweet.
Check that out.
So guys, look, stay safe, stay healthy. We're going to do more of these think tanks. I think they're fun. People appreciate them. Just stay safe, stay healthy as best you can. These are really, really pressed times, obviously. And, we'll also keep working, as we say, to never let a Christ go to waste. We're going to unlock the Joshua Kahn conversations in the coming weeks. If you need any sort of deal to stay on as a patron, let us know, or to join as a patron. Other people, and this is just for people who can, obviously, but some people are stepping up and increasing their levels to sort of cover other folks. So if you have the capacity to do that, consider it. And if you're just watching now, smash the like, hit subscribe, and make sure to watch all of our illicit history docs that we've done with Forrest and Vic Viana. I'm really proud of those. They're really, really important. And I think, especially the last one with Mark Blythe on neoliberalism, is very important contextualization for the times. All the conversations we have with Adolph Reed and Richard Wolff and the internationalism. Very proud of what we're doing. There'll be an announcement of another project I'm doing this week that I think folks will be really excited about. It's not going to require, it's going to be a different model. But it is going to be a show, and it's going to be some other offerings that people can just watch in addition to everything else. But a media synergy that people have been wanting for quite some time is going to be launching this week. Check out Literary Hangover. Check out all of David's
I'm trying to think
work.
of funny versions of what that could be that isn't the truth. But anyway, we'll maybe workshop some other examples.
Me and Sagar are going to debate China every day on TikTok. I tricked Sagar into using TikTok, and we're going to argue about China.
What was the old MR caller that used to always talk about Jordan? Oh, Greg.
Greg.
So please, can I have the time where I will ask the question? So I know you're not libertarians, but there was a plane crash in Ukraine, and I guess my question for you is there a Singaporean technology that will bring people back to life? It could also bring everybody back to life who's died from corona. It's not done through government, so I know you don't like it, but is that something that you would be open to? The Singaporean get people back to life machine.
They're real questions.
Yeah, real questions. But yeah, guys, we're working on some TMBS books, which I'm really excited about. and there's going to be different ways you guys can get those. At the end of the month, we'll have our shop back going. I got to say, I cannot wait. I obviously have no idea what the timeline is, but I really miss doing live shows. So
I know. I was sad realizing the other day that would have been the Austin show.
Yeah, 2 days, right?
Yeah, Friday.
Yeah.
I'm making chicken fried steak tonight, actually, to deal with not having my Texas food.
All right.
So we will get to that though. We'll be back on the road, and we've got a ton of projects we're working on. And of course, also you can go to Red Emmons and buy Against the Web: Cosmopolitan Answer to the New Right, which actually speaks to a lot of these themes in that we've been talking about. Folks, we're back live on Tuesday. I'm going to do a live stream tomorrow, and spread the word and stay safe. And guys, thanks a million.
Peace.
All right, take care, y'all.
Peace.